Good afternoon and welcome to episode 5 of the Volpe Creates show, the weekly show where we talk about video games, game development, and the games industry. I'm your host, Chris, joined as always by Baby. And Lucas, how you doing? Awesome. Lucas, our venerable intern and showrunner. So I think we got an exciting show. Our special guest this week is Jason.
Days in a
How
row.
you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Yeah.
It is. We talked a little bit before the show, but before we get into things, you want to give a little intro about who you are. You have a
Sure.
pretty prolific career, so
Yeah. I've been making games since about 1996, and mostly as a programmer. And um, I've worked for a lot of large studios over the years. Probably most of my time was at EA, but I also spent some time with Riot Games and a few other titles as well in there. So like Sierra Studios and things like that. But now I've co-founded my own company with a couple other partners called Exultant Games, and we're working on our first title. Still in kind of pre-production, trying to find what we want to really make. We're experimenting with some ideas, but hoping to get something out fairly soon. So, yeah.
fairly soon, plus minus 2 or
Yeah.
3 years.
Well, yeah, on the indie schedule, right?
Yeah,
Fairly soon, meaning who knows? But yeah,
totally. So it's kind of blowing my mind, but we've known each other for like a decade,
yeah,
and
it's great.
yeah, you were a part of the local game dev community, and I don't know, we just sort of started chatting or whatever. And you've come to several GDEXs and helped done talks and community reviews and stuff, portfolio reviews. But I think we really kind of started chatting about like gaming when you were at Riot. I think that's when we kind of like really went in depth. And I know you were there. What were you? Was it 3 years, 2 years, 3 years?
I was with them for almost a total of 7, 6.5, somewhere in there.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I worked on both League of Legends and Valorant.
And then you ended up moving on from Riot and starting your own company. So why leave the wonderful world of well-paying game
Yeah,
development to start your own company?
because I can. That's the simple answer.
Because you
Um,
can.
yeah, and I wanted to try things different and explore out on my own. I since I've been in the business so long, I've learned so much that I wanted to put a lot of that into practice for myself and experiment with things, which is something that's hard to do when you're at a big AAA studio. You're pretty much you're pretty much focused on your task at hand, right? You have very defined tasks usually, unless you're. I mean, I was also a technical director, so sometimes I was able to define the tasks, but even then, it was still very narrow.
Yeah, we should have
And
mentioned your specialization's more on the programming dev
yes,
side of the industry.
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
and a little bit of management, but it was primarily the engineering side of things. Hence my Twitter handle, Games Engineer. Um, but yeah, the goal of Exultant Games was to create a studio that was willing to try things that kind of push the bounds in some direction, right? We're still trying to figure out exactly what that is, like what it is we're trying to accomplish. But the nice thing is, um, thanks to my long career, I have the resources to be able to do that, right? It's uh, we build up enough of a war chest and everything that we can fund this pretty much indefinitely at a small scale, right?
Sure.
Not a big one, but that's a nice feeling. And so
This is
being
you and
able
your
to,
partners, your other
yeah,
co-founders.
yeah,
Yeah. That's a great place to be. I
oh yeah,
remember I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, you were super excited. What was it? Were you working on like a water rendering system? Is that what it
yeah,
was?
3D fluid simulation, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. You
yeah,
still working on that? How's that going?
yeah. So
I
it
remember
it
you showed it and it looked awesome.
yeah, and I still have it, and we're still considering using it. There's a few things about the game design that we're thinking, okay, do we need full 3D? And so I have currently been trying out a more of a 2.5D, sort of a traditional fluid simulation, kind of like I don't know if you remember the game From Dust.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's kind of in that vein where you have a large fluid simulation that affects the terrain and everything like that, right? Um, and in this case, our game is called Isle of Disaster, and it's all about disasters, natural disasters, and kind of battling them and rescuing people and stuff like that. So the we're still trying to find the fun aspects of that. Some of the directions we were going in for the past, I don't know, 6 months or so, it was fun, but it wasn't fun enough, and it wasn't pushing anything in the direction that we really wanted to go for. And so now I'm trying something new, um, and finding that by switching from 3D fluid simulation to 2.5D height map kind of stuff, uh, it gives us more flexibility in terms of rendering more and doing other things in the game, because the 3D fluid simulation is just such a heavy cost,
Sure.
computational cost,
Totally.
that you really have to kind of narrow your scope when you include something like that. We still may use 3D fluid simulation for other things, but um, probably not for the entirety of the game. So we'll see.
So what is the when you say it wasn't fun enough?
Yeah.
What was the holdup? What do
So
you feel
we
like
were
you're missing?
yeah. So the old design, the one that we've currently abandoned, was almost kind of an RTS like thing. So you're effectively having two different uh, factions on this island, one of which is very much using natural disasters as a weapon and against you. And that was not turning out the way we thought it would. It sounds interesting initially, and then as we started working through the details, and that's where you always get tripped up, right? It just wasn't
True
coming
that.
together, right? And I'm sure somebody could probably, some brilliant designer could probably make it work, but I'm not that person, and the rest of my team is not making that either. So
I don't know a ton about the game other than what you've told me over time and here, but I feel like there's like a genre of games that's always tried to like what was the one? Was it Black and White, the big like monster game? And
yeah,
there's a couple other like natural disaster games that are always trying to like you would think the content would be like an easy win for a game,
exactly.
but we can never like quite get there. Like it never crosses that line to being like really excellent.
Yeah,
Um, there's some tricky stuff. So I'm a teacher, and I know you're uh, big on education as well. And I was talking to my class about a game that I've been working on, just designing. So the general concept is Earth's dead. You're on a spaceship with a bunch of survivors, and you play as the artificial intelligence whose job it is to get that ship to the next Earth, right? And so it's sort of like a Fallout shelter where you build up the ship and add rooms, and you can assign people to different rooms or whatever. And we have this like really interesting loop of okay, traveling to a place, it's dangerous, it uses resources, collecting resources, and then like a Sims component. Um, but the cool thing being like this journey could take hundreds or thousands of years, and since you're an AI, you're going to be around, but the like Sims will die off and stuff over time. So like we got that part down to a really cool place,
yeah,
but we can't figure out how to end the game.
yeah.
Like, do we just randomly generate planets and you go find one and land there? Like, I'm stuck on figuring out how to get that next part of the loop. Like sometimes you can get like the almost like the in the gutter day to day experience down, but then the larger story, and sometimes it's
Yes,
the reverse. Sometimes you have the larger piece
exactly.
and you can't get the little details down. So
That's
you're
exactly the kind of same struggle we went through, and so we're still kind of there, right? I mean, that's the it's both infuriating and fun at the same time,
yeah
right? Because on the one hand, the ideas you thought you had brilliantly designed suddenly are kind of starting to fall apart and just
yeah
crumble through your fingers, and then at the same
yeah.
time,
Every idea
you
is
know,
brilliant until you actually have to make it work, right?
yeah, exactly, exactly, and but at the same time, I'm seeing all sorts of other possibilities come from these ashes. Like, that's some of the things that I wasn't necessarily expecting have become sources of inspiration for new designs.
Like what?
And well, one of them is just simply the camera angle. Like, originally, we were going to keep it a very top-down, uh, traditional RTS camera the whole time. And then one day, I think it was after, I forget which GDC, but we went to GDC and we were talking. Um, GDC, by the way, for people that don't know, is the Game Developer Conference. It's a very big conference, yearly. But we were realizing that, we needed a more personal connection with your characters, because it felt too distant, quite literally distant, because of the camera angle, but also it just you weren't getting any kind of emotional context from the game. And so we decided to make it a third person perspective and see how that felt. And that was actually pretty compelling in a lot of ways. And we started building out a lot of the game around more of a third person strategy game, and then realized, well, but the disasters look good from both ground level and high level. And we want both of those viewpoints. And so then we were like, okay, how do we work both of those things in? And now uh, like I said, we've ditched the strategy component. We're now actually more of an action game, and it's just now straight up search and rescue.
Okay.
And that allows us to have lots of different types of vehicles like helicopters, hovercraft, rescue boats, all that stuff. Seeing things from multiple angles, actually getting out on foot as well and rescuing people. And it allows us to tell stories that are very personal and emotional. Um, and at the same time, you see the spectacle of the natural disasters from lots of different perspectives. And that already has just become way more compelling than what we had before. So,
Hmm. Yeah, when you're describing it, I was like, this is kind of like ActRaiser, where top down, you take care of the world, and then when it comes time to do some damage, you're at
yeah.
a 2D side scroller. I don't even know if anyone knows. Lucas, do you know what ActRaiser is? You have any idea what that game is? Yeah, I'm not surprised. Game's awesome, but it's also one of the early Super Nintendo games. So,
Yep.
uh, yeah, that's really intriguing. I've been playing Path of Exile a lot, and I really like the game. But one of the things I noticed is, and granted, they've been working on this game for over 10 years, and I think we've kind of just moved away from an older style of game design where there is top-down camera, small character, dialogue box pops up with lots of text, because that's pretty much what Path of Exile is like. And then you compare that to something like, I mean, any number of games, Last of Us, Horizon Zero Dawn, or whatever, where it's just a character giving a long block of text just doesn't do it anymore. When I was growing up and we were playing games back in the 80s and 90s, that's what you got.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of just interpreted everything, but stuff has changed. So figuring out how to create that emotional resonance between the
Yeah.
player and the character it's so important. It's what's going to leave that lasting impression, I think.
Yeah.
Besides if you just cool natural disasters, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I I think you still can make even just 2D text dialogue boxes still resonate, but it is a more difficult thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's plenty of examples of it working, but I think there is a generational bias now towards more of um, the the fully immersed kind of um, storytelling that we get from some of the larger games out there,
Yeah.
and of course now with a lot of the tools available to game developers, it's actually quite doable for indies to make these kinds of experiences. It's
Mm-hmm.
still not cheap. It takes a lot of time and effort and money, but it's at least plausible for an indie developer to create those kind of experiences. Whereas, um, maybe like a decade or two ago, it just wasn't even really feasible. But like,
Oh yeah.
Like what was it? Was it Firewatch? Can't remember. Is that the right one? There was a lot of really great um, experiences in that game, some dialogue and emotional connections that were done with a relatively small team, and that's the kind of thing that I think we're going to see more and more of. Um, but it is hard to pull off, even as an indie. It's because good writing is always hard.
Yeah, yeah. I need to finish Firewatch because that's is that Campo Santo? Is that
Yeah.
the dev shop for that? Yeah.
Yep.
Um, yeah. I think they did some really cool stuff. Obviously, the visuals of that game or something is well regarded.
Yeah.
But yeah, I that bias comment I think is real interesting. So I have a friend who has just started. He's in his mid 30s. Just started playing video games like within the past couple of years. Never really played them. Never had a console. So he's been sort of like introduced into some of these games, and he watched me play Path of Exile, which is a Diablo like action RPG. And I didn't think anything of it. I played Diablo 2 growing up. He's like, I can't really play those like board game type games. I was like, what? Board game type? And I think he was thinking like looking down at miniatures like on a board kind of thing. And I was like, never in a million years did I think of Path of Exile as like a board game
Yeah.
type. I guess I would associate a board game with more like turn based where you're moving characters on a grid or something, but that was just in his mind. So I mean, I think he has this. You can call it a bias. I don't think it's not like in his mind it's not a negative. It's just his experiences with games are modern games, like Horizon Zero Dawn, or he played Resident Evil 7 together, and he plays a lot of Fortnite. So those type of games, which are generally pretty, what we say, like action forward, like there's a lot going on. You're not really doing a lot of talking in Fortnite. Um, though he did like Horizon Zero Dawn a lot, which has a lot of RPG elements and
Yeah, it
stuff.
does.
Kind of has like a Mass Effecty feel to it.
Very
Uh,
much so.
but I don't know. Is that bias? Is that something that when you work on design, are you thinking about from like a marketing promotion target audience perspective?
I personally don't, honestly. It's first of all that bias is obviously not 100%, right? Like it's not. You can't just say here's a group of people. This is what they believe. That's
Sure.
never true. Um, but the other reason I don't worry too much about it is because as long as we can capture a significant chunk of the market, that is really all you can hope for. And anything beyond that is oftentimes more luck than planning. Um, it's just almost impossible to please everybody. Sometimes it happens, but I don't know that there have been many cases where pleasing everybody was a plan from the start and it actually worked out. Usually, when you plan to please everybody, it ends up into a muddled mess.
Yeah.
It
Totally.
tends to work better if you have a very clear, focused vision on an idea that will resonate with a significant chunk of the audience, and then it may catch on with more than that. But if you can capture at least a big chunk, that's a big win, especially for an indie developer. All right.
Yeah. One of the things I go ahead. Yep. In Slack. Okay. Doo-doo-doo. Oh no, you're allowed. You're allowed to interrupt.
Oh,
Um,
well,
yeah, just go ahead. Go ahead and ask the question.
yeah. In that case, so we have someone in chat asked a question for Jason. They were asking if there is a looting component during the search and rescue portion with collectibles or crafting of resources. That's what they asked.
We have considered it. We haven't committed to it yet. Our old game definitely had a lot of um, collecting of resources and crafting, but we may put that uh, off because we want to focus more on the action and keep it a little more fast paced. Anytime you introduce collectibles, it can be a component that can slow down the pacing of the game. But that said, we'll experiment with it and find out, right? That's something that there may be opportunities for collectibles that aren't required. I think that might be something that might be interesting, right? You stumble across things that are interesting as you're rescuing people. And we definitely will have lots of optional objectives and things like that. But at this current time, probably not.
I think that's a good way to go. So not to keep talking about Path of Exile, but I just love that game. But there's a mechanism in it that it's a when you're in a map, there's like a sub map you go to and you do a couple things, but it slows the game to a crawl because then it becomes about like inventory management and adding like benefits and stuff to weapons. So like you're in the middle of a map fiddling around for like 20 or 30 minutes with your inventory. And I was having a conversation with a friend that plays it the other day. I was like, they really should just make it so that whatever benefits you get by doing this thing are transferred to your headquarters, your like hideout, where when you're not doing the map, you can go and mess around with your weapons and customizing armor and whatever. Because yeah, I mean, you can run a map in 10 to 15 minutes, but you're spending 30 minutes tweaking these little things. It can really throw out the flow. So I could see like if you're in the middle of the field on a rescue mission, things
Exactly.
blowing up, meteors falling all around you, probably not the time to start crafting your boat or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
But that being said, I did like games like Don't Starve. I love that game. I think that, and that's all crafting.
Yep.
But I want to jump back to one thing when we were talking about the bias in the market.
Yeah.
One of the things I tell my students, and I say this all the time, but if you like something, then chances are other people like it as well, right? The key is figuring out how can you execute on that thing well, and understanding what its like relative niche is. So just because you like something and other people like something, is that like 10 other people, or is that like 10,000 other people? Because if you have a rough gauge on that, then to your point about making sure you're capturing some percentage of the market, then you can build a business off of that.
Yep.
Which leads me into my next question, because I think you're sort of hitting around this, but you have been in the industry for quite a while. Not saying you're old, just saying you've been in the industry a
It's
while.
fine. I'm old, or at least older. Hell, let's put it that way.
Older, yeah. But I think one of the things that for someone who's been in the industry, I've been doing it like 10 years, which is hard to believe, but figuring out like stability and consistency on keeping your projects going, keeping your business going. We tend to think about all these like, Minecraft blew up and became this multi-billion-dollar success. I was like, yeah, how many Minecrafts do you get in a generation, right?
Yeah.
So how has your like experience and thought process been? And I know you mentioned earlier, just from a stability standpoint, you've got the resources. You said indefinitely, but I assume you're going to want to release a product at some point in your life before you die. But
Yeah, exactly.
how are you thinking about just the idea of creating a product in a company? Because now you're a business owner.
Yep.
That's going to be able to have stability and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, from a business perspective, our goal obviously is to become profitable and grow a little bit. We don't never want to get really big, because part of the other mission of this company is to keep that family feel to the company, right? That uh, don't get it so big that you don't know everybody's first name, kind of thing. And um, in order to achieve that, though, we do need to be, uh, I think, profitable enough that we can hire enough people that it's a reasonable size. Right now, we don't have the resources to hire a lot of people, right?
What's a reasonable size
Like
in your
a
mind?
dozen people or so.
Okay.
That's, I think, when you get to about a dozen or so, uh, you have enough people in basically every department that there's a little bit of synergy. There's still enough. Um, the team isn't so big that communication starts to get unwieldy. Because that's another thing I see is once you get into, like, say, I'll just throw out a number and say 50 people, communication becomes really hard, or it starts to get
Sure.
hard.
Yeah, you
And
definitely. There's some break points where, a small team of 4 or less, and then you start to get like above 6. That kind of has a different feel.
yep,
And then in the like 10 to 15 range begins to have a different feel.
yep,
Multivarious, like at its largest between full-time and part-time people, I think we had 16. And I could tell that the mechanisms of communication, just making sure everybody was on the same page, it began to just get more challenging,
exactly.
for sure.
Yeah. And I've led teams much bigger, and distributed. Oh, that's the other thing. So Exultant Games is a remote only studio. We don't have like a head office or anything, at least not currently. Probably won't. But I'm used to that sort of thing. I've been doing remote work for a long time now, and I've led teams all across the world and found that um, I could do that when the teams were small pretty easily, even across time zones all the way to halfway across the world. But when the team sizes grew really large, it didn't matter whether we were all in the same building or not. It just became um, really difficult, and so that's one of the reasons why I would personally like to keep Exultant Games a relatively smallish company, um, but still, in order to even get to the point where we want to be, we do need a profitable game, at least one to kickstart us, right? Because right now we're in that mode of our first game. We have no current income, other than just the three founders here are throwing in equity periodically, right? And um, that's enough to keep us going, but it's not enough to grow the company. And
Sure.
so we need a game out there to give us a reliable income stream for a while to grow the company and get that second game going and so on and so forth.
And I
And that's
assume because you started this, you don't want to get into client work or anything, right?
correct. Yeah, because I mean that's one of
Then
the
you're
reasons
back where you were.
I exactly that's why I left those kind of things is to get more of the experience of being able to do our own thing, right, and not be at the whim of someone else. So
Um, so along those lines, you got you and 2 others. You're the founders, right? You're gonna grow. You're gonna be the boss in some
mhm,
regard, which is
yeah,
gonna definitely impact your ability to be hands down. So I always joke,
right,
my background's healthcare. I always joke I left healthcare to make video games. I've spent 90% of my week not making video games because I'm running the ship, right?
yep,
Have you thought about that? Where
oh yeah.
it where are you gonna fit in that process?
Well, see, that's the other nice thing is that I've had the experience leading teams, and I like that part too, right? So I enjoy a lot of different aspects of game development, and so when it comes time to be more hands off and just helping teams, unlock their abilities and be more of the person that makes sure that all the resources that they need are there and that there are no blockers and that everything is running smoothly. I like that part too. And so I will enjoy that transition,
So it's like
but
the
it's
producer side of things a little bit.
a little bit, although from a I mean, I was a technical director, which is a little different than a producer, but it's because it's definitely much more technology oriented.
Hmm.
But it's a similar kind of feel. It's just more about uh, the technology and the software rather than about um, sort of some of the more abstract aspects of game development, or not abstract, but more the stuff that you don't necessarily associate with the technology. Right?
Sure.
Producers tend
Yeah.
to work more about um, getting well, they do all the kind of miscellaneous stuff, frankly, right? I mean, that's kind of the thing I've seen with both producers and development directors tend to handle a lot of the things that you don't necessarily think of when you think of game development. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Your line about that kind of caught me on this was, removing barriers and hurdles and
Mhm.
making sure like that's a good producer. And people ask this all the time. A good producer, let's say at a larger company, right? Like if you're 4 people, then I mean, you're all kind of the producer at that point.
Yeah.
But at a larger company, a good producer is going to be able to like get in between the art team and the programming team and make sure they're all speaking the same language, making sure assets are. I see this a lot in the art space where somebody will show me, they want me to critique a portfolio and they'll show me this like amazing model that they made. I was like, looks great. There's no way you can use that in a video game. Like there's just way too many polys for a video game or whatever. But a producer is going to be able to help guide, set the tracks, I guess, as the train's barreling down. Um, and navigate those, which is something, I mean, you can do in a smaller studio without having the producer title.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's the other thing is like in a small studio, like you said, uh, you wear a lot of hats, right? Everybody wears multiple hats, and you have to be comfortable with that. But as the studio grows, people will find more specialty roles and fill into those things in a way that uh, benefits the team for efficiency, but not necessarily benefiting the person's desires for what they like to do. Because that's another thing I've seen is some indie um, people do like wearing many hats, and then as the team size grows, then by necessity they have to focus a little bit more on
yeah,
one of those roles. And so that's why a lot of times you'll see indie developers leave companies as they grow larger because they just don't want to do
yeah,
that. But I think, thankfully, since I've seen it from the other side um, and started that way, I'm comfortable with that, and um, I want to do both. But I don't mind doing very focused work. I don't mind wearing many hats. It all works fine for me. So
sure. Yeah, there's this serial entrepreneur kind of idea out there, that there's just people that they like to be on the ground floor
yep,
until they hit a certain point. Typically, if they're hitting that point, then because they came in early, they have some sort of equity position or whatever, and then they bounce out
yep,
using that equity position as a buffer to work on the next weird thing. But some people really, yeah, they really like being on that intro. Things are exciting, ideas are kind of flying before it starts to become more structured. Just by necessity, by size, you have to start to get a little more rigid. Things you let slide maybe when you're a group of 4, you can't let slide when it's 20.
yeah,
Um, but so you're comfortable being the boss then?
yeah, absolutely. And I look forward to it because it's another thing that. So I'm also a senior instructor at GameU, where I teach students how to make games. And one of the reasons I'm doing that is because I want to help the next generation of game developers, make their visions come true. And I see my role as a leader of the company also in a similar vein. When I get to the point where I'm managing people, it becomes more about helping them fulfill their visions and become the next, great thing. And ultimately, when should I ever retire, I don't know if I will, but should I ever retire, then I'll get to enjoy the fruits of my labor by watching all these or playing all these great games that are created by people that I helped, support.
Yeah.
So
I think too, just having you as somebody that they can look to and be like, this is an actual career, right? That's one of the
mhm,
biggest challenge, if you want to call it. But when I'm talking to parents about potential college positions where their kids can go, like people don't believe that game designer is an actual job,
yeah,
right? They're like,
yeah,
wait, you can do that and make money? I'm like, yes, you can. I know several
absolutely
people.
can. Yes.
I know several people that have done very well, working very hard. Um, in the games industry, it's a big industry. There's a lot of opportunities. It's a competitive industry, so you
Yes.
you need to take it seriously. But there's a lot of opportunities there, and now some of that's just a reflection of your and I's age where there was no degree granting programs in the
Right.
80s and 90s. Like there was no game design program. It was all just
Yep.
like weirdo people in economics and physics and computer science that got together to make something weird. I think isn't the founders of BioWare? I think they're all medical doctors, right? If I'm
hmm
the three of them, I think so. But nowadays, there's actually like a more formal educational structure
Right.
to it. But still, just seeing somebody like you who's been in it for a long time, is successful at it, and I mean, you know what you're talking about, both on the technical aspects, but also on the sort of career pathway. I think that's super important, and I'm sure it alleviates a lot of parents' concerns.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
So
I've had some great conversations with some of the parents of my students, and I can see their eyes open as I discuss, some of my opportunities and how um, my career unfolded, and so they're like, oh, okay, there really is a path here. This isn't
yeah,
just some, little hobby thing that my kid's gonna enjoy.
sure.
Um, so
Then
it's
you
cool.
say bye and drive off in your Tesla, and they're like,
Yep.
okay, maybe this is a real thing. Do you still have your Tesla?
Oh yeah, I love it. I love it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, you took me on a ride on it, whatever it was, 5 or 6 years ago. A little bit after you got it, because
Yep.
you got one of the first models, right? You were
Yeah. One of the
one
Model
of
S's. It was
one.
2014 for me. Yeah.
Okay,
Before the autopilot got introduced later that year, so I don't have the hardware for that. But that's fine. I don't mind. I like to actually drive. So
you haven't swapped up to a new model yet.
no, I just I haven't felt the need because although there are a few new features that would be nice, not enough has changed that I really feel compelled to get a newer model. Plus,
Yeah,
I don't drive as much as I used to, right? Being remote, all that,
yeah,
there's just not a lot of reason to.
yeah.
So
You have the charger station. Did you install one of those
actually,
in your
no, I
house?
don't need to. Charging overnight is more than enough.
Okay,
Um,
awesome.
so
Yeah, that was a cool car. When you took me for a ride, I was like, man, this thing is something else.
it is so much fun to
Um,
drive.
so we're getting a little close on time, and I have to ask you this because you're like literally the only other person in the world I can talk to about this. But The Witness, Jonathan
Oh,
Blow.
yes,
I love The Witness. I tell my students they should play it. I'm always talking about
absolutely.
it, and everyone looks at me like a crazy person. And I try to show them it. Uh, but there was this awesome documentary on YouTube. I can't remember what it's called, but if you look up, Jonathan Blow Witness or whatever, it's like a hour-long documentary. But just him talking about the process of The Witness, and he he apparently played this game. I don't remember what it was, but back in the old days, computer game where you would cast spells by moving the mouse around on the screen. And he thought it was really interesting, but he was like, it's just sort of superfluous. Like we already have a way
Right.
of casting spells, which is a keyboard button. Like
Yeah.
doing this doesn't solve any problem. But he thought about it for like 20 years
Yeah.
and finally had the idea for The Witness. And I know you were a big Witness fan, so I want to gush
Oh,
on The Witness for
absolutely.
a little bit and Jonathan Blows. So, um, get what was your? Because I mean, you did everything on it, right? Like you
Yeah,
went
I
through the.
completed it. I did every possible thing you can do in that game, and it took a long time. It is not an easy game, especially the final challenge. Um,
The
but
mountain one.
yes, where it actually becomes timed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's see that's the thing is like up until that point, there's no time pressure. You can do anything you want. You can wander around, just admire the beauty of the game, and it is a beautiful game.
Yeah.
The art direction of that game is stunning. Um, and another thing about the game is that it's every single detail in that game is intentional and put there for a reason.
Yep.
There's nothing extraneous. And yeah, I really when I first started the game, I didn't quite know what to expect. I knew it was beautiful, right? Like I'd seen some screenshots. I was like, oh, that looks really, really nice. I didn't even fully know what genre I was really getting into. I knew it was a puzzle game, but I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
if it was more than that or
Totally.
less than that. And as I went through it and experienced not only the puzzles, but the way uh, the environment is informing everything as well, I realized that I was just scratching the surface. Like there was way more to this game than I realized at the time. It was yes, there's a puzzle game here, but there's so much more to it. And so as I completed the game, I kept finding just more and more details that just blew my mind. I was just like, wow, okay, that took a lot of thought. That took a lot of planning, a lot of probably experimentation, and I was stunned at how um, cohesive the game was. That was the other thing. It's like
Yeah.
it's amazing. So yeah,
Yeah.
I gushing, sure, I'll gush. I could gush all day over that one. And I
That
think I was
go
just
ahead.
gonna say Jonathan Blow. I think and his team. He did have others working with him, but I would say that if you want to follow someone that has um, really keen insights, he's another person to really uh, look into and follow. Now he is very opinionated, but with opinions that are well informed. You may not agree with his opinions all the time, but he always has at least information to back up his opinions, which I like. It's not just
Yeah.
knee-jerk reactions to things.
Yeah. I think he also tends to like at the end of the day, he always kind of comes down to like, it's just my opinion. I mean, he'll
Yeah,
talk for like 20 minutes about something
yeah,
and like maybe he bashes a thing or two. And then at the end, he's just like, I mean,
yeah,
that's just what I think, you know? You don't have to
yeah.
listen to me. Uh, that dude, he is, I mean, people throw genius around. I think within the structure of game design, I think he really is. He's
Yeah.
one of those like um Hideo Kojima style where
Yep.
just they do stuff in the game space and you're like how has no one ever done this before?
Right.
It's
Yes.
so elegant and simple, but they find a way to just like tease out these little interesting things. um Jonathan Blow is another person I would love to get to GDEX. He doesn't
Yeah.
do very many shows or talks or anything, but I would love to have him and just chat
He-
with him.
He's in
uh
demand all the time, so it's hard to get his time,
i'm
and he's
i'm
very
sure.
busy.
Yeah, I
So,
know he's working on something. He hasn't announced
hmm
it. He was working on some like
well,
computer language thing for a bit,
yeah,
but
so he's been continuing to use that. He made the language. He's using it to create the current game he's working on, which is
okay.
another puzzle-based game, different kind. And from what I've seen of it, um, it's again going to be very ambitious in terms of the design scope. And I think that's another thing that he is currently pushing uh, is, and I think he even, I'm trying to remember, he even mentioned something about the ambition problem in games. Probably want to look that up at some point, but um, he feels like we're just not being ambitious enough, right? And I think he
Yeah.
is definitely ambitious and pushing in a
And
lot of
he
ways that are really interesting.
well, I think just for folks that don't know, I highly suggest just watching a couple interviews with him if you're into game design, but
Yep.
because I think his sense of ambition, when we think about ambition, us normal folks down here on the ground, like you're thinking about like larger set pieces, bigger events, like crazy things. His are all like conceptually
Yep.
ambitious. It's like
Exactly.
how can I take this idea, which The Witness is literally like line puzzles that you do like on the back of a cereal box, right? Like that thing, but how do you add layers on top of it that not only add complexity but all fit together in a weird way that then you take back internally to the rest of your life? Because
Yes.
the Witness is really like at its base level, in my humble opinion, at its base level, I think is about observation, like looking
Mhm.
around you and studying the world that you're in, the environment, and how all of these things are like nothing lives on an island by itself, right? Which is funny that the game is set on an island. Like there
Yep.
are no islands. But really, I think that game is about like the process of learning.
It is absolutely.
And it's just
And
like that.
and his previous one, Braid, did the same thing. There was a lot of about really understanding. It's teaching the player the game mechanics in a way that forces the player to question their assumptions about the mechanics. So first and most good puzzle game designs do this. Like first they introduce the core concepts, you learn those, but then your expectations are violated in subsequent puzzles where what you thought you knew about the way the puzzle worked is only partially right. And so really what you need to do is learn the details of how the system works and what the
Hmm.
solutions could be. And he takes that to the nth level, like just keeps digging deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yep.
And it's really stunning. By the time you get through it, you really do feel like you've learned something new, not only about the game, but much more than that, about the way you
Yeah.
think and the way you know, because it really forces you to question a lot of things.
Yeah.
Um,
You have to like. I equate it to learning how to read like a step at a time, where it's like,
yeah,
okay, sentences start with capital letters, got it. They end with periods, got it. Like, here's how commas work. Here's how parentheses work. Like that process. Um, but it's all about that internal validation of figuring something out and being like, oh, I get it now.
yes,
And then you talked about that mountain puzzle. The mountain puzzle, besides being timed, throws you for another loop where there's that section where you need to understand the puzzles well enough to just instinctually look at the puzzles, because it'll give you a set of 3, and you have to figure out which ones right off the bat are not solvable.
yep,
Right? So you've got to narrow out of the 3, you got to kick out 2 of them because they're not solvable before you even start solving the puzzle.
yeah,
Because if you spend too much time on one that's not solvable, the timer will run out. So
yeah,
like just the idea of knowing the process and the mechanics well enough to be able to get rid of a couple options before
yeah,
you even start on the hard work of the puzzle is just insane. Like it's
yeah.
a beautiful, beautiful game. And
And
unlike you, I didn't know anything about it. I just liked Braid, so I was like, all right,
yeah,
I'll get the Witness.
I was the same way. Yeah, yeah. And the other thing about that challenge at the end is all the puzzles prior to that were very well defined, authored, scripted. The final challenge, however, all the puzzles are randomly generated, and yet they're
Yep,
all solvable. Well, aside from those, ones that are intentionally not solvable, they're all solvable. They work correctly, and that's an accomplishment in and of itself, right? Just being able to program a
sure.
system that generates these puzzles on the fly in ways that are still interesting and fun, and truly test your full understanding of the game
Yeah,
at that point. So,
and the mountain, like I remember when I realized this, the first puzzle you do is actually the overlaid map of the
mhm,
rest of so like you're solving one puzzle by looking at it, and then you walk into a room and you are now in the puzzle,
yep,
so you have to remember like where the walls are and stuff and where all
yeah,
the important parts. I was like, Jesus, man, you're a lunatic. You're a
yeah,
lunatic.
yeah,
But
that's great.
um one of the things that kind of jumping back to what we were talking about before with target market and all that stuff is one of the parts of the documentary. He's talking about how he was glad the game was successful because The Witness is a game that's like impossible to explain and market without ruining the experience of it.
That's
So like
kind of true. Yeah.
how do you market The Witness besides saying like, oh, it's a puzzle game where you're on an island?
Hmm.
Because anything you say after that ruins the
Yeah,
sense of
it really
discovery.
does. And I think that's partially um, overcome a little bit by the fact that they did such a beautiful job with the art direction, so that
Oh yeah,
screenshots, just if you see any screenshot from that game, you immediately get your attention on it. Like that really helps, and that's a key important lesson for game
yes,
developers is really have some sort of uh, attention grabbing visuals uh, to get people to at least glance at your game, right? Because that's half the battle. Like when you open up any kind of storefront, Steam or Epic Games or any of these things, there are just so many games out there, just
yeah,
thousands and thousands that people are just going to scroll by. If they don't see something that captures their attention, they're not going to click on it. So
yeah. Both of its games are visually like Braid has this
Yep.
watercolor, like I hate to say dreamlike because that's used a lot, but it really is this sort of like abstract watercolor,
Yep.
Mario game.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I agree. I think that I actually have a from the Video Game Art Gallery, which is a not for profit that works with game developers and creates images. So I have a one from The Witness that I believe is signed by Jonathan Blow. That as soon as I saw that, because we had the Video Game Art Gallery out for GDEX as one of our charity partners, as soon as I saw that, I was like, I need that. I want that now.
Yep.
But
Yeah, on
yeah,
a similar vein, like you mentioned, Hideo Kojima, um, Death Stranding, another game that if you try to describe it, sounds utterly dull, and yet
yeah,
visually it's captivating, and in terms of the actual experience, oh my goodness, what a game! But
yeah,
trying to describe that without giving anything away, and without um, and still make it sound interesting. I mean, that's a tough one because you can really
yeah.
only describe it as a walking simulator, and yet they nailed it. And it's way more than that, but that's kind of how you have to start to describe it. And it's like,
Yeah, yeah. It's every so often in that game, and a lot of people don't like that game. Get it?
sure,
But every so often that game just like all the pieces fall into place, and
yeah,
you're just like, oh, like I get it.
yeah.
I'm with you. Uh, and even like, do you play PT? Hit the
I didn't
silent.
actually know. Yeah,
Oh
I
my
missed that one.
lord. Yeah, that is such a shame that they pulled it from the store
Mm,
because that game is something else, man. Like that what he did with that just whatever hour and a half experience
yeah,
was insane. I hope Konami just releases it as a standalone download someday. I doubt they will, um, even if it's not connected to Silent Hills anymore or whatever, because it really is. But that's another example of there's all these horror games
yeah,
out there that are trying new stuff, and nothing against them because there's a lot of good ones, but then yeah, someone like Hideo Kojima just comes out and he's like, I'm just gonna make a little hour and a half, 2 hour experience, and everyone's like, what the hell? This thing's amazing. And just some people are just good at stuff. They're just
yeah,
really good at what they do. Uh,
absolutely.
so yeah, I'm excited. I'm glad we got a chance to talk about The Witness.
Yeah.
I literally don't know a single other person that has played it that I can
Really?
talk
Oh
about.
man. Well,
Yeah,
hopefully we can get some more people to play it, and we can enjoy a little
yeah. And he
chat
put
session with them all.
I know he because I think that was supposed to be like a 3 or 4 year experience, and he blew through all his Braid money, and then had to get other money to keep it going because it took him like 7 years, I think,
Yep.
to develop it. And I guess it was successful enough that he got all that money back. So sweet, now he can dump it into the next thing.
Yep.
But it truly is incredible, and I think you'd really enjoy that documentary. If I can find the link, I'll send it to you. But I just stumbled on it, and it was awesome. But well, man, I think we're getting close to the end here. Thanks for coming. I had a blast.
Yeah, me too. Yes, thank you so much for inviting me.
So
Always
I
enjoy it.
always like. Are there any places that people can follow you? Check you out. I know Games Engineer. Any other
Yeah,
places where you can showcase your
yeah.
stuff?
I'm also on YouTube. Um, I believe I forget what my actual YouTube thing is. If it's just Jason Conaway, or if I did Games Engineer, but I usually try to put Games Engineer as my handle. No, it's just Jason Conaway. Um, and you could probably also get me on. Um, well, actually, probably Twitter and YouTube are my most active, so those are probably the best ways. Anything else, I might ignore it. So let's stick with those for now. But
Okay.
yeah, and then yeah, keep an eye out for Exultant games. See, right now we're staying quiet because we're still trying to figure out what we're making. But eventually, once we do, we're going to be announcing things and showing things off and getting some feedback. So
Sweet. Well,
yeah,
Jason, it's a pleasure. I'm glad we got a chance to talk after 2.5 years of COVID time.
yeah.
Um, so thank you again for being a part of it. Uh, thank you all for watching. I would say bye from baby, but she's napping back there. Uh, Lucas, you want to say bye to everybody?
Yeah, I can. Thank thanks all for joining. Appreciate it.
I guess
Thank
we
you.
will. Yeah, we will see you all next week for episode 6 of the Volpe Creates show. So take care, everybody. Enjoy your
Awesome.
weekend.
Bye.
Have a good one.